It's time to get educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. This is the Dr. Duke Show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show. Before we get started, please hit that share button so we can educate more patriots around the country. Today, we start in Connecticut, where an area middle school is doing damage control after 8th grade students were given a sex ed assignment asking them to select pizza toppings describing their sexual likes and dislikes. In other words, they had to come up with euphemisms, what pepperoni meant in terms of sex, what peppers or onions might have meant. 8th graders now transforming pizza toppings into sex acts for reasons we still don't know.
Now, it's interesting on this story because this happened in Enfield, Connecticut, a population of that town, about 40,000 people. So when you listen and watch the entire school board meeting, they address this issue, obviously, and at one point, a mother actually brought in pizzas. She put at least the boxes. I don't know if they were actual pizzas.
Did she get arrested for solicitation?
She got kind of kicked out or talked to at least. But there was the topic of how this came about, this assignment came about, was talked about. There was parents who spoke up against this. There were board members who spoke against it. The district superintendent talked about it, and we'll get to that clip in a moment. But the actual assignment itself that got sent out was called Pizza and Consent. And they say, in the assignment you can see what consent is and what's pizza got to do with it. And then it explains basically on, imagine you have your own pizza. And so it's, everyone has their own pizza, likes and dislikes. And so they equated, as you said, toppings to various things. So do you like cheese to equal, kissing? So like basically a sex pizza, if you like kissing, okay, you put cheese on your pizza, I guess. I don't know. And then, olives would mean giving oral sex. Now, this assignment, again, was sent out to 8th graders and almost immediately was pulled back as best they could with it because the teacher says it was an accident, that the teacher never meant to send this assignment out. Now, how do you accidentally send that assignment out? Yeah. We don't know.
I mean, what pizza-related a lesson plan did you have in mind that just happened to evolve into sex?
I mean, without knowing, because I don't know the teacher's intent and what actually happened, I went out, it came from a packet of things, of options, and maybe the teacher just sent the wrong one. Now, we're going to show a couple clips. First, I want to hear from the superintendent. His name is Chris Drezick. He basically told the crowd that it was completely an accident, and here's what he had to tell everyone in attendance.
And the simple truth was, it was a mistake. And I know that there are some who may not believe that. I know there are some who don't necessarily maybe want that answer. I'm not in the position to try to change narratives on what actually took place. And I say that because normally I would take responsibility, and I still do, when one of our staff members make an inadvertent mistake. In this particular case, I didn't even get a chance to, because the person who made the mistake jumped ahead of it before I was even notified that it had happened. And I say that because that says everything you need to know about the character of this person better than I can say something out loud. So I felt an obligation to bring this up, not to draw attention to this person any more than it's already been drawn onto them, but to set the record straight that this was simply an error. And I don't know about you, the 9 of you, or anyone in the room, or anyone watching at home. If anybody can look in the mirror and say they've never made an honest mistake, you're probably fooling yourself.
You know what? That's all well and good. I want to hear that exact speech the next time a mistake happens with race. Because if this was about race, rather than sexualizing pizza, you wouldn't be so glib, Mr. Superintendent. You would not say, this is such a good person, we're not going to investigate this. We're not going to look into this any further because it was an honest mistake. I like what you had to say, Mr. Superintendent. Let's not get so overblown that we enter into cancel culture. The reality is, though, I'm pretty sure, had this been a different kind of mistake, you would have. And so let's just take that worldview and apply it more broadly. When people make mistakes, I'm willing to give them a second chance. I'm willing to understand that. But that's got to be a fair and equal process, not one that applies to pizza assignments and not necessarily other ones.
And in this, I watched I watched everything that the superintendent had to say because he had a lot more to say, but watching a lot of the rest of the school board meeting, the vibe you got from the room and when all the members were talking, you get the sense of a small community and that it was an honest mistake. Again, I don't know. And equating it with the race, again, I don't know. I just know what actually the information that we have there, and it did sound like an honest mistake. But what I like and appreciated about what happened was there was one board member, John Unger, he actually proposed forming a special bipartisan committee to look into that situation because he seems to, in his statements, care about the education of the students. Take a look.
Out of consideration for the many, many parents that spoke here and who are concerned about the well-being of their kids and the quality of education that they're receiving in this good town, I think we as a board would be very responsible in consideration of them in forming a committee that would include them, because this is the Enfield Public Schools. It's not the Enfield Government Schools. So I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that committee include these parents, include the board, include some of our administration, and let's get to the root cause.
And I think that's exactly right. I mean, you can't just do what the superintendent said and basically more or less just drop it because it was a mistake. You have to investigate these things. Katie said something at the beginning that made sense. This is probably one assignment in a whole bunch of relatively sexually related educational opportunities. There's no doubt that sex ed in schools across the country, there's all sorts of information, there's all sorts of assignments. Maybe this was supposed to be something different or a little bit more mild. She picked the wrong one. It's unlikely that this was one of one, right? If this is one assignment of one that she had sitting on her desk, it's unlikely she made the mistake. But that tells you something. There are packets and packets and bundles and bundles and books about how to sexualize the classroom. Maybe we should be investigating why any of them are there.
With all the censorship taking place on social media platforms, we've made it easy to keep up with your favorite content. Simply download the Freedom Project Media app in your app store. Get access to 18 new videos a week, plus thousands of archived shows, lecture series, and educational animations. Download the Freedom Project Media app on your Apple TV, Roku, tablet, or phone, and make sure you allow for notifications to keep you informed.
Maybe you're a weirdo at home saying, you know what? I want that sex pizza. Well, you can just move a little east over to Rhode Island where they're trying to get more sex and then sex some more into the classroom. They have a controversial, I would call it a controversial, sex education bill running through their legislature right now. And they wanted their sex ed education to talk about the pleasure-based sexual relations, as well as same-sex relationships and gender identity. And that's all in there, all in the program or sex education program that's for these 6th through 12th graders. Let's just take a look at the news.
The House Education Committee meeting on Wednesday, talking about an update to how sex education is taught in the state. That would include lessons on pleasure-based sexual relations. ABC 6 News speaking with the primary sponsor of the bill, Representative Rebecca Kislak.
For you, what does that word pleasure mean in the legislation?
So I missed the social media on this today, I suppose. And again, I think that one word in the legislation should not be our focus here.
During our interview with Representative Kislak, she would not define what pleasure means in the bill, despite dozens of people on social media expressing concern over that word being included.
Any child under 18, we should not be talking about sexual pleasure. We shouldn't be talking about some of these topics that they're looking to enroll into sexual education. I think it should be basically from a clinical standpoint, that's one thing. And I actually think anything they want to teach regarding this matter, the curriculum should be approved by parents.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. This goes all the way back to the 1980s. People don't realize this. In the 1980s, Ronald Reagan's administration, education administration under Bill Bennett, was really successful about going with the phrase, just say no, right? The idea that when it came to drugs, when it comes to sexual opportunities for kids underage, just say no. This was about teaching biological sex and not social sex or cultural sex. And the word pleasure here, inserted into this document, tells you everything, right? We are abandoning that. We are abandoning the notion forever that biology matters. Sperm and egg, birds and bees is gone. Now, what we're doing is transforming sexuality education into a simple, pleasure-based form of education. How do you pleasure yourself? How do you pleasure others? How do you derive pleasure for sex acts that don't seem pleasurable? Anal intercourse. All those things they're trying to teach your kids.
Now, you got to remember, as you heard in the little spiel there by Rebecca Kislak, who again is the bill's primary sponsor, and how she had that big smile on her face, and she said, I think that one word in the legislation should not be the focus here. I thought they make up definitions for whatever they want, and however they want, whenever, and yet she actually is trying to make the point that pleasure, which is the only word that matters
that
here.
Was the word defining
that is
it.
The word, does not matter. But let's take a look at what else the bill has. Now, this bill will, for all schools, grades 6 through 12, stating that they must provide sexual education programs that are appropriate for students of all races, gender identities, and expressions. It's limitless, so how can you get them all?
Well, can I ask, though, what is a sex education program that is race specific? Do blacks do something different in bed than Asians do? I mean, again, you can see even from the top of that this is completely woke education when it comes to sexuality.
Equity, equity, equity. That's all I have to say. Now, this sexual education programs, they must identify gender identity and expression and the harm of negative gender stereotypes.
Again,
but there are 97,000 genders, so how do you know what every stereotype for every gender is?
That has nothing to do with sex either.
Yes. Now, the sexual education programs will affirmatively recognize pleasure, there it is, based sexuality and different sexual orientations. But what does it mean? Well, if you're Kislak, you just say it doesn't matter.
You know, maybe Kislak wants this stuff in the public schools because she lacks kisses.
Okay.
On the lighter side.
And that's interesting there. Now, we did have a representative named Tara Mack, who's a Democrat from the state, who is also very excited about this bill. As she tweeted out, really excited for the House Sex Ed bill hearing later today. Teaching comprehensive, queer, inclusive, pleasure-based sex ed was a highlight of my time teaching.
I bet it was, Tiara. I bet it was.
Now, just so everyone knows, because it's Rhode Island and there's like 7 people who live there. Well, it's a size of with seven people living there. I guess there's more than that. But anyway, Mac ran on a platform of being unapologetically black and queer. When that is your whole platform, that you're unapologetically black and queer, there's something wrong with you.
Every single thing that we saw by way of what they're teaching really isn't sex-based. It is social justice-based. Call it what it is. I mean, you know, the word pleasure doesn't bother her, and she won't define it, right? But if you would switch the word pleasure with biological sex, it would have been a whole different number.
Now, the only positive we have, at least at this moment, is that at present, parents can opt out their kids of sex education for now.
Today's show is sponsored by our friends at MyPillow. Save up to 66% on all items at MyPillow.com when you use the code Dr. Duke. That's DRDUKE. Support this show by supporting a great American company.
Well, all of that is happening out east. We're back here in the Midwest, where we're going to look at Iowa and how Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds has defended parental rights. What? So I'm like, governor defending parental rights? This is shocking news. She recently told the local news in Iowa that parents should decide what is appropriate for their kids. And she proved a point by actually, during an interview, reading an obscene passage from a book. Now, I'm warning you, Mom and Dad, if any kids are watching, get them out of the room if you don't want them to hear this, because Kim's making her point by actually reading this, and then the news actually, I guess, providing it for the rest of the audience to watch. Now, before we get to that, a little background on why she's even reading a passage from a book. There has been debate happening in Des Moines, in the metro area, with 6 different school districts, and they're examining content of several different books that parents have deemed objectionable. Now, the book that we're going to talk about that Kim is going to read from is by George M. Johnson. It's called All Boys Aren't Blue. And what he reads in just a moment here is quite obscene, but parents, you decide for yourself.
I'd be happy to read it, and then maybe your listeners can decide if they feel whether it's appropriate or not to have young kids have access to a book that says, "You told me to take off my pajama pants," which I did. You then took off your shorts, followed by your boxers. There you stood in front of me, fully erected, and said, "Taste it." At first, I laughed and refused, but then you said, "Come on, Matt, taste it. This is what boys like us do when we like each other." I finally listened to you. The whole time I knew it was wrong, not because I was having sexual intercourse with a guy, but that you were my family. I only did that for about 45 seconds before you had me stop. Then you got down on your hands and knees and told me to close my eyes, and that's when you began oral sex on me as well.
Notice what she did. She read it out loud to a news organization. If they put that on the 6 o'clock news, they were going to have the anchors would have had to say, "Mom and Dad, take your kids out of the room for what we're going to do." So if the news organization was actually going to show that clip, they would have to tell the parents to send the children out of the room. And if they can't sit there and watch it for a newscast, how are you going to justify this in their middle school or high school? That was a brilliant move, number one. Number two, did you hear the nature of what was read? Show the author's tweet, Mike. Here's what the author tweeted. "Iowa is now trying to criminalize teachers and librarians that share All Boys Aren't Blue and books like mine. Game on. Here's the fight. We're going to take this to war." But listen to what Johnson is saying. "I wrote an adult-themed sexual book that I want taught to little children. And if they try to stop me from doing that, they're book burners, they're censors, they're somehow anti-reading." No, sir, that's not the point. The point is your book is completely filthy and not appropriate for any children under the age of 18.
Now, Reynolds also said that if you're talking about, do I think inappropriate things are being displayed in libraries and in classrooms across the state? From what I've heard from parents, I absolutely agree with that. And she said, these are the parents' children. They're not ours. They're not the government's. They are not the school districts. They're the parents' children, and they have a right to weigh in on their children's education. Everyone, move to Iowa.
Re-elect that governor, at least when it comes to schooling. It's time for some real education. All week long here on the Instant Classic segment, we've been showcasing our Heroes of the West series. These 5-minute videos are designed to educate adults and children alike on some of the greatest men and women who left their mark on Western culture. In a world where we are tearing down statues and destroying reputations, we've consciously chose heroes who are in the crosshairs. We are not going to stand by to destroy the character of somebody like Winston Churchill because of some views that he held. When you look at the entire picture, I think you see a remarkable leader.
War heroes are often remembered for sacrifice in battle, while wartime leaders are often remembered for tenacity in dark times. Sir Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill will be remembered through the ages as both a great hero and leader in the Allied fight against Nazism in World War II. Churchill was born in 1874 in Blenheim, Oxfordshire, England, to an aristocratic family, the eldest son of Lord Randolph Churchill and Jenny Jerome. As a young man, his father insisted he serve in the military, and he entered the Royal Military Academy as a cadet in the cavalry, graduating in 1894, just after his 20th birthday. His military travels exposed him to geopolitical realities, which included being shot at in Cuba and escaping captivity at the hands of the Boers in South Africa, a feat that made him a war hero. After military service, Churchill won a seat in the House of Commons at the young age of 25. In 1908, he married his wife Clementine, a union that would produce 5 children. In 1911, he was called to serve as First Lord of the Admiralty, a post that made him civilian leader of the British Navy. After overseeing the disastrous Gallipoli campaign in World War I, Churchill resigned from government, only to return a few years later, having gained valuable experience in leadership positions. By 1939 and the outbreak of World War II, it became apparent that the progressive policies of Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain towards Germany had failed miserably, and Churchill was called back to serve again as First Lord of the Admiralty. He took command on September 3rd, the same day Britain declared war on Nazi Germany. In May 1940, Churchill succeeded Chamberlain as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. The appointment, in some ways, was an act of desperation in response to the Blitz, Adolf Hitler's massive air raid campaign against London. Over the course of the Battle of Britain, London faced 57 consecutive nights of bombings, claiming more than 20,000 civilian lives. During the summer and fall of 1940, Churchill and his coalition government worked feverishly from underground offices and bunkers to plan the strategy that would ultimately win the Battle of Britain and turn the tide of war. His inspiring speeches, delivered to an anxious and uncertain populace, cheered, rallied, and inspired the nation while continuing to fight. He reassured all who listened that we shall fight on the beaches and we shall never surrender. Churchill's resilience and defiant rhetoric turned to jubilation in early May 1945 as the free world celebrated the end of World War II in Europe. Despite the victory, Churchill failed to hold on to the position of Prime Minister as post-war England sought to rebuild. But in 1951, the rapid spread of communism in Eastern Europe swept Churchill back into the position of Prime Minister. In 1953, he was knighted and awarded a Nobel Prize in Literature, in part for his 4-volume history of World War I and his 6 volumes dedicated to World War II. Churchill resigned the position in 1955 due to failing health, but remained a member of the House of Commons until 1964. On January 24, 1965, at the age of 90, Churchill died after suffering a stroke. One of the unmovable pillars of freedom in the battle between tyranny and liberty, Churchill fought tirelessly to free the West from all forms of oppression, including fascism and communism. With fierce passion and dedication to his principles, Churchill lived by his own advice.
Never give in. Never give in. Never, never, never. In nothing, great or small, large or petty, never give in except to convictions of honor and good sense. Never yield to force. Never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy.
With his trademark cigar and V for Victory sign, Winston Churchill remains an enduring symbol of the West.
Now, I want to take a moment to thank our Patriot Club members for making these videos possible. Their financial support provides the resources to bring these incredible stories to life for all of you to enjoy. And in fact, we have about a dozen more scripts ready to produce, but we just need the finances, to make them an actual reality. So if you're not already, please consider joining our Patriot Club with a $99 gift to help us continue to produce the Heroes of the West series. Simply visit patriotclub.us to get started. And that's going to wrap up this show for Freedom Project. I'm Katie, he's Dr. Duke.
And stay educated.